Would you like to learn how to sew two pieces of your knitting together, but with a really neat seam that you can't really see the seam from the right side? I can show you how to do that today. When I start my knitting, I always like to leave a bit of a tail that's going to be enough to use to help me stitch up the seam. This packet's quite old and been very well used, but knitter's needles are very useful to use if you've got them. There's two sizes in this packet, but the idea is that it's quite a blunt point. It's not going to damage the yarn as we're stitching it, and the eye of the needle is quite large to accommodate the yarn. When we're threading needles, people very often do it like this, but with knitting yarn, it's easier to pinch the yarn like so and then press the eye of the needle through it. That's an easier way to thread the needle. I'm going to be showing you ladder stitch, and what we'll generally do with ladder stitch is we'll stitch one stitch worth in from the edge, and I just would like to show you, I've got my ribbing stitch here. If I pull this apart a little bit, can you see these stitches here on the side? Little loops. They're the stitches that I want to use when I'm sewing up my ladder stitch. And on the other side, you can see them here as well. Instead of starting straight away on the next piece, I find it creates a little lump. So I'm going to go up here on the same piece of knitting, and it'll bring that knot just hidden away. And now I can go to my other piece of knitting. Here's my cast on stitches. You can see the loops there. If I go to the very last one and put my needle through that and draw it through, and now I want to go underneath again on this side, again trying to disguise that knot that I've got there. So go up, and now I'm going to be looking for these loops on the opposite side. So there's one. I shall go under, and there's one on this side underneath, and we'll gradually go side to side, picking up one loop from each side. And this stitch is called ladder stitch because, if you can see, we're creating a ladder in effect here. Let's do a few. There we go. And what we can do now is gradually pull on those ladder strands, if you will. And that's created the seam. And we can see this row of ribbing is kind of melted into the other side. So let's start again. Under one stitch there, under one stitch here, and so on. It's quite a slow process. Some people hate sewing up their knitting work and put off sewing, but I quite like the process of hand sewing my knitting together. Yes, it takes a bit of time, but it's taken a lot of time to knit all this, so why not take the time to stitch it up nicely as well? And then I can gently pull on these stitches, and you can see it all gathering up together there. And that's created a seam that's quite invisible, I hope. And on the rear side, there is a little bit of a lump, but there has to be somewhere for those stitches to go, but at least they're not showing on the right side. I've completed the ribbing section of my pullover that I'm working on, and hopefully you agree that that's quite a nice neat seam there. And now I need to work on the lacy part and stitch that together. It's the same process, one stitch at a time. and then I'll gradually work my way up, and every now and then just pull on that thread to tighten up the ladder stitch, creating the nice neat seam. Let's pull on this now and see that all come together. I've also got a pattern going on here, and I'm just visualizing that the stripes are matching up okay, because when I knitted one side and the other side, I counted to make sure I'd done the same amount of pattern repeats until I got to the armholes here. I've reached a part of my knitting where I've joined in a new piece of yarn. I generally do a little slip knot, a little tiny one, to hold them in place while I'm knitting, so I can undo that. And because the piece of yarn that I started with has now been used, I'm going to use one of these to stitch the rest of the seam. But what I shall do is do a couple of stitches there, and I'll pop my needle through to the rear of the work, turn my work over. Now to stitch this end in, I'll simply use the bulk of the seam that's on the back to do a few stitches. I'll weave the end through the stitches, something like this, to hold those in place. I've got two pieces of yarn. I'll stitch with one, and then when I've finished, I'll sew the other one in, going upwards after the seam has been worked, just simply to reduce the amount of bulk on the same place, spread it out a little bit. So these two ends, I'll find out which is the longest one, but they both seem to be very similar in length, these. Select one, thread the needle again. I'll tuck this one round the back, pointing downwards, so it doesn't get in the way. And then I can start stitching up again. Just the same as I was doing before. One stitch at a time, enjoying the process, to give a nice neat seam. And to the untrained eye, the people who don't knit, they won't even know there's a seam there. I hope this has been really useful for you to help you with your knitted work and creating nice neat seams going forward. If you like what you see, please subscribe. I've got lots of tutorials on sewing and knitting to help you with your creative wardrobe. Thank you.